Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to MACKMYRA Swedish Whiskey virtual tasting. I'm your host for the evening. My name is Richard McKeon. I've been a brand ambassador and area sales manager for MACKMYRA for the last 2 years or so. I think it was 2 years. Celebrated my second anniversary just a couple of weeks ago. First tasting I've done since, so very happy to be doing this. And thank you very much for coming to join us. For anyone that hasn't done a virtual tasting before, I'll explain a little bit about the layout, the format, how we're going to go through things. So we're going to drink each whiskey one by one. If you've got more than one glass to hand, feel free to obviously pour out a few samples to have them ready to go. Being 5 cl 50 ml samples, you're not obliged to pour out the entire thing unless that's what you'd like to do. I would recommend actually pouring out a smaller amount so that after we're done or sort of towards the end of this, you've still got a little bit you can go back to and then think about, spend a bit more time with things maybe and see how you feel about it. As we go, I'll provide you with some backgrounds to MACKMYRA, where Swedish whiskey came about, how it was all started, the style of whiskey that we're trying to make and the flavours that we're looking to achieve. I'll try and give some tips here and there maybe for anyone that might benefit from it. Just a few tips on maybe nosing and tasting a whiskey, how to sort of assess it. Running order that we're going to go through this evening is Mac, we're going to start with, then Brooks Whiskey, then Svensk Ek, Stjärnrok, and then Svensk Rock at the end. So Mac, Brooks Whiskey, Svensk Ek, Stjärnrok, Svensk Rock we're going to go through. If you haven't already, I would recommend having a glass of water on hand, just to keep yourself hydrated, of course, but also just to give the palate a little, cleanse, a little clean as we go through, just sort of freshen things up between drams. And as I mentioned, maybe don't pour the entire dram as we go through. We have got an offer. Anyone that tries something tonight and thinks that they want to go online and buy a bottle, if you buy a bottle of Stjärnrök, the spare sample that you would have had on the side of the box, buy a bottle of that and you'll get a 40% discount on any of the other 4 bottles that we've got. You can see a code hopefully going across the screen at the bottom now. Stjärnrök 40, so look on the sample bottle that you've got for the spelling. Don't worry about the umlauts and things, but Stjärnrök 40, buy a bottle of that, get 40% off of one of the other ones. Cool. So that's how it's all going to work. As to MACKMYRA history, if anyone's joining us this evening that has tried to MACKMYRA before or has heard about it, please, curious to know. There's usually a bit of a mix. Some people that have no idea Swedish whiskey even existed, and other people who have tried it a number of times and just fancy doing a tasting of it and having something slightly more formal perhaps than they might have had. But please feel free to to let me know. I'm here on my own this evening, so there as much interaction as I can get out of any willing participant will be very welcome on my part. If you've got a birthday, let me know. I'll give you a little birthday shout out, something like that as we go through. So anyone that isn't familiar with good evening, buddy, thanks for coming back. So anyone, and hello Steve as well, another regular, very nice to see you both. So anyone that hasn't heard of MACKMYRA before, doesn't know much about it, I'll give you a little bit of history before we get into the first dram. So we're Sweden's first single malt whiskey distillery, founded in 98. Production began in December of 99, just in time for the turn of the millennium, so that we can have established 1999 on our branding forevermore, always looking a little bit older. We had 8 founders who started the company. The idea came about while on a skiing holiday, something that they went on once a year as a group of friends. And on this one fateful trip, somebody said, why is nobody making whiskey in Sweden? There's a big appetite for it there. Lots and lots of whiskey clubs in Sweden, but nobody making it. So they thought, right, well, let's set about doing it. So they did. They spent a year or so, or a little bit more, researching how to do it, how to get things set up, touring Scotland, talking to experts and getting advice from people, and then ended up building their own still, a little 100-litre still that we used as a pilot still for the first 3 years of our now 23 or so years of life. 3 of the founding principles that they set out when starting that we still live by today. Swedishness was number 1. So Swedish, they wanted everything to be as Swedish as possible. They didn't just want to be another Scottish styled whiskey that happened to be in another country but was exactly the same as everything else. They wanted to have a Swedish footprint on there, and we'll talk about some of those, some of the steps that they took to try and ensure that as we go through with some of the whiskies. First of all, the easy one to do straight out the gate would be all the ingredients being Swedish. So all of our grain, our barley that we use, our peat for the peated expressions, water and yeast, everything comes from Sweden. The second of the three principles was innovation. So because we weren't as beholden to some of the laws that or regulations from the Scotch Whisky Association, for example, have on using different types of casks, that doesn't exist in Sweden. We make a single malt the way a single malt whiskey is supposed to be made, 100% malted barley, batch distillation in pot stills, 3 years in oak. And if I've missed that one there, I'm sorry, but there's everything that we do is single malt whiskey. On the whiskey side, at least, we do make a gin, bit of a side note. But on the innovation side, we're able to use quite a few different types of casks. So, as I said, we're trying to not go and make a carbon copy of Scotch. Our founders wanted to use as many traditional Swedish wine casks as they could, amongst just using things like Swedish Oak as well. And I'll talk about some of those, especially when we get to Stjärnrök, second from the end. So we try and do different things and make it, by being innovative, we also end up being a bit more Swedish at the same time because we're using traditional Swedish stuff. And then the third thing, sustainability, which we're always very excited to talk about here. And I'll tell you about lots of little details about how we look at sustainability throughout the company from top to bottom, but also the big ticket item, which is our gravity distillery, this big vertical 35-meter tall distillery using gravity rather than energy to pump things from one room to the next. And when we get onto Mac in any moment now, I'll tell you a little bit more about that. We've been in 3 different locations since we started. The first 3 years of pilot distillery and a series of the founders' gardens for malting and peating the barley, moving from one garden to the next when neighbours started to complain. And then 2002 moved into the Brooks Distillery, where our second whiskey of this evening takes its name from. Here we go, a picture here. So the white building and the red brick joining it is the Brooks Distillery, a little island where the village of MACKMYRA is. So again, this is it's a Swedish name. It's us being Swedish. It's not us trying to sound Scottish. MACKMYRA is a place where one of the 8 founders actually lived. So so MACKMYRA, or MACKMYRA, which is probably closer to how a Swedish person would pronounce it. Very much a Swedish place. And then the Gravity Distillery is about 15 kilometers or so, 15 minutes drive perhaps, just to the east of where that first distillery, or first proper distillery, was. We've got warehouses dotted all over Sweden, but anyone that's, and some of the guys that are here tonight, I know they've heard this before, anyone that's new to us might not know that we store about 99% of our whiskey 50 meters underground in an old disused sort of iron ore mine that goes down 400 or 500 meters, and we just use the top part of it, at least for now. Perhaps as we grow, we might need some more space and look to go further down. But underneath a big mountain, big James Bond-esque entrance to drive into the side of it, then down this big tunnel into our whiskey warehouse in the Bodas mines. We've got a small warehouse under a circular sort of bistro cafe that's on top of a mountain, 3,500 feet in the air, Losdalen, we can see here. So that's the circular cafe bistro, and then underneath it there's a little warehouse where we store some 30-litre casks. So you can go up there, have a cup of tea, maybe try a dram to a responsible degree, and then ski back down, or get the ski lift back down the mountain. And then the other of the 5 or 6 warehouses that I like to talk about is Fjorda Holman, which is in the Stockholm archipelago, a little island there. But we can see here this larger one in the foreground, and the part of the island closest to us. And you see this big sort of dome shape rock, and it is a rock that just happens to look like a sort of some old sporting arena. It's hollowed out and used to be used by the Swedish Navy as a munitions store, where they used to keep torpedoes, and now for the last, I think, maybe 10 or 15 years we've been in there, filled with casks. So anyone that does own a 30-litre cask, is quite a big part of our business, selling small casks to people. They can fly over to Stockholm, get a little boat out to the island, go and taste their cask, have a food at the restaurant nearby, and then fly back home. It's quite a cool place to be. And if you're lucky to get there in the good weather, as I did last year, it's a fantastic place just to sit and watch the boats go by. 3 key ranges that we have. whiskey wise. So we've got our core range that we've got all 4 of here this evening. Our seasonal range, which Stjärnrök fits into. So it come out twice a year, limited editions. One will be an autumn winter seasonal release that's attuned to that season, and the next one will be spring summer, and again and again and again. The one that we've got this evening is last year's autumn winter release. And then our moment range that we haven't got one of this evening, but if you do ever get an opportunity to try it, I haven't had a bad one yet. That's our really exclusive sort of small batch stuff, anywhere from 1,000 to 4,000 bottles or so made at a time. Once it's done, it's done. And then the person that's responsible for making all of the whiskies that we're trying this evening is Angela D'Orazio, who's studied under Jim McEwen. If there's any Bruichladdich or Bamore fans in the house this evening, Angela was our chief nose officer who created everything that we've got here this evening. Second woman in the Whiskey Magazine Hall of Fame as well, incidentally, and a wonderful character. I think that's probably it as a whistle stop tour, as much of a whistle stop as that might be, into things. I'll say time to get a whiskey in my glass. So if we start, if you haven't already, please pour a glass of Mac that we have here. Hopefully. Right. So excuse me, a little glass of water there after that big long monologue. I think I've earned it. Right, so I'll say yeah, Mac, we've got in our glass. Hope everyone's got some in front of them there. Cask recipe for this. This is just American oak casks that have been used. So if anyone's finding any notes of that might remind them a little bit of bourbon, things like vanillas and caramels, brown sugars, a lot of that's going to be coming from the casks that we've used for all this. So as I said, a mixture of virgin and a virgin American oak and first fill American oak. But behind it, jumping straight into the nose, is I always get some fruits, so orchard fruits and maybe some gentle spices is part of our spirit character, I would say. In breaking it down into quite simple things. Anyone that can expand outside of that, please feel free to, and let us know any of your tasting notes in the comments as well as we go. But this, I always get lots of fruits. So pear, a little bit of maybe a lot of orange peel in the background, which reminds me of American oak quite often. If you have something that's been in American oak for quite a bit of time, that's maybe not had bourbon in it before, I tend to get quite a bit of orange peel, dried orange peel on there. Anyway, I'm just have a quick scroll through and see if we've got any questions or anything coming in. Anyone that does have any questions as we go through, please feel free to pop them in the chat as we go. Right, well, I'll say I'll do some tips on nosing and on the palate in a moment, but for now I'll just say thank you very much for being here. I hope everyone enjoys the evening, and school. Cheers. So at 40% ABV, which I think is it's the lowest that any whiskey can be, of course, but it's one of only about 2 whiskies I think I've ever seen us release at 40%. I think it's got more, for me, it's got much more texture. I always think this when I have the Mac, far more texture than you'd expect to have from something that might be about 40% ABV. I think part of that will be the casks that we've used. In fact, there's quite a few virgin American oak casks that have been used. Just adding a few more, oils and a bit more body into the whiskey itself. So I think it always has a bit more on the palate, a bit more chewiness, a bit more bite to it than a normal 40% whiskey. And quite similar, I think, on the palate to the nose. I have another go there. Yeah, not quite as sweet. There's a bit more bitterness to it, and I'll say something like this again when we get into Svensk Ek, but a bitterness that's more like the way that dark chocolate is bitter compared to milk chocolate. So not bitter, and it's making off-putting, but it's not quite as sweet, I think, as the nose is. And I think maybe some of the oils that are coating my mouth are sort of adding to a bit of the intensity to it. So I mentioned the Gravity Distillery. I'll let everyone chew on that whiskey for a little bit as I tell you a little bit about the Gravity Distillery. So this is the first whiskey that we've released that's that's been distilled at the Gravity Distillery. So from 2002 until 2011, 2012, we were distilling in the Brooks Distillery that we saw that picture of earlier. And then since then, we've been distilling at our purpose-built and custom designed for our needs Gravity Distillery. So 35 meters tall, 7 stories high. Top story being a roof bar with a big terrace that you can stand out on when we do tastings at the end of distillery tours, up in the 7th floor, and you can look out over the forests where we are. So if I didn't mention at the beginning, I don't think I did, we're about an hour north of Stockholm, near a place on the edge of Gävle. That's where you can see there. So Gävle, and I think where that white arrow on the left hand side is probably actually pointing not a million miles away from where the Brooks Distillery would be. So sort of where the V maybe is of Gävle there. But where the red dot is, we're right outside of the town centre, basically where the forests begin. So yeah, you sit up on the top floor and you can have a dram and then look out over, you know, of God's, whichever one you subscribe to's creation. And then yeah, so then the next 6 floors down, and here we can see a picture at the very top. That's the roof terrace, or the big balcony that we have. And then the glass fronted parts is where the fermentation happens at the top part of that, and then the distillation. You can maybe, if you lean right into your screen, you might just be able to see the stainless steel fermentation tanks and the copper Forsyth pot stills that we have. So right underneath the balcony, floor number 6 is where the first stage of production begins. So we've got the bar. We've got 2 big green silos on the back of that distillery that send in the middle. There's a grain elevator that sends grain up. One silo will be peated malt, the other will be what we call our elegant malt. And what we can see here, yeah, is the elevator in action there. So that comes up, so just on the back part of the distillery, away from where the glass windows were out the front, and then their production begins from there. So everything begins on floor 6, and then each floor on the way down is the next stage of the production process. So hence the name, you know, that's where the name Gravity comes from, for the Gravity Distillery. We allow, you know, gravity to take our each part of whatever we're making at the time, whether it's the wash or the water or whatever it is that we're doing, it falls from one floor to the next using or harnessing the power of gravity, as opposed to using lots of energy pumping things from one room to the next in a horizontal fashion, as a traditional distillery would do. We're using gravity there, and there's all sorts of other very cool and very geeky, which I say with great affection, parts of technology that are in there for not letting energy go to waste. So we've got a closed circuit water system that picks up heat for from the mashing, for example. So leftover heat then gets stored in this water system and then sent off to other parts of the distillery or the offices to heat the offices sometimes, or that could be used maybe to give the stills a little boost or wherever it might be needed. So next to nothing gets wasted whatsoever. And then we've also got our own power plant off to the side of the distillery that's fueled with biofuel, bio pellets. So, you know, it's a pretty self-sufficient operation that we've got going on there, and a little forest warehouse off to the side of it as well. So, yeah, going back into the Mac, if anyone is in there, so usually things pick up a bit once we've had everyone have 2 or 3 drams. But Steve, thank you very much. So very fruity, opal fruits in glass. I like that, actually. That's opal fruits. Well, opal fruits, did they become starburst, or were they starburst and then opal fruits? I feel like opal fruits was the original. That's what I've always described them as. Perhaps someone can weigh in and let me know. But yeah, lots of fruits, I think, Steve. Yeah, I think that's fruits, vanillas and caramels all the live long day. Cool. Right. So if anyone has any questions or comments as we go through just now, maybe time to move into Brooks whiskey, which is our second dram of the evening. Okay, so Brooks whiskey, and perhaps if Carl could show us, yeah, perfect. Picture of the bottle there. You can see on the packaging, on the there's, you know, stencils on the box and on the bottle itself. Looking at the box might be a bit easier. The building that you can see at the top is the front-on view of the Brooks Distillery. As I mentioned earlier, the distillery where this whiskey takes its name from. This was given that we'd only started production in '99. In the first 3 years, nothing. It was, you know, experimental years and just sort of testing things out, seeing, you know, trying to make something and see where things were going. It wasn't until 2002 moving into this distillery that when they realised that they had something and they felt confident that they were onto a winner, if you will, they decided to up their game and went from using their 100-litre hand-welded still they'd made themselves, moved up to 2 proper big copper pot stills, a pair of them from Forsyths again, which are still in that warehouse now. So we've got 2 pairs of Forsyth stills, one at the old warehouse, which we're now using to make gin at Brooks Whisky, and then a new pair at the Gravity Distillery. But moving into this is that's an internal shot of the pot stills at the Gravity Distillery, and that's Jimmy, and I can't tell who is looking the other way there. Jimmy Hansen is our head distiller over there. So Brooks, it was a big thing for them, for the founders, and their project becoming more and more, alive by the day. So moving into Brooks, they wanted to, when we finally had enough stock, to start bringing out a core range whiskey and not just have lots of small limited editions here and there and very small batch things. They wanted to name their first proper core release, because there was one before that was sort of half a core range but not quite. I think it was MACKMYRA the one or first, but Brooks Whisky is the first core range whiskey proper, I guess, that we had. So on the box and on the bottle, they try and celebrate that with some of the MACKMYRA history as well. Nicole, if you wouldn't mind popping it up just again, because if I hold my box up, the camera never focuses on it. But you can see, as well as the building at the top, you can see just above the blue MACKMYRA Brooks Whisky logo, a little 30-litre cask, because in the very early days of MACKMYRA, we were filling lots of 30-litre casks, because we had this tiny 100-litre still that I mentioned. We'd take a 30-litre cup from it, and it would take 6 or 7 distillations to be able to fill one cask with our spirit. So they started using lots of 30 litres, and that's why today we've got such a big part of our business is selling small casks. And then just on the left hand side, in the shadowy side of the box, you can see is a little stencil of the copper pot still. You can see the 3 legs coming out the bottom, the pot in the middle, of a funny shaped pot that it is, and then a big long straight neck and the line arm then coming off across to the side. And then if you end up with a bottle like this bottle, or you see a box of it somewhere else, you look around the bottom, look around the side, you'll see all sorts of other bits of history to it. Rather interestingly, as a quick aside, just talking about the box, when the first ever edition of this whiskey came out, because we've been doing it year after year, the first ever one also had and included a stencil of a skier skiing down a mountain, because that's quite a big thing in Swedish tradition, and these days at least. And it was a skiing holiday where our founders had decided, or come up with the idea to start things. But in Sweden, there's a very restrictive and very tightly controlled alcohol laws when it comes to the sale of it and to the marketing of it. So you can't have anything on there that alludes to, in any way, to people having a good time. You could have fact-based things and maybe sort of not somber but sort of straightforward things. You can't have stuff that makes it look fun. So they had thousands of these bottles got released, and our colleagues over in Sweden had to go around with a sticker when they got told off about it, and go to each and every store that had some of it in stock, and put stickers over the skier. So if anyone ever, which they surely did, some people would have managed to get hold of that before it was covered up. Might be worth more than it was originally, at least at this point. I don't know how much it might be worth, but it's certainly something that if you're interested in cool and odd little bits of history, it might be worth seeing if you could find sometime. Back right onto the whiskey itself. Brooks Whisky. This is where it starts off in a conversation that I have quite often with people, where we tend to have some relatively complex, I might say, cask recipes that we use. So anyone, as I'm sure there could well be people here this evening, have only ever really tried maybe Scotch, Irish, or American, maybe a little bit of Japanese perhaps. You tend to have maybe I might go so far as to say 95% of single malt whiskey at least is either been in one cask or 2. There are examples of a number of different casks being used, but it tends to be either be ex-bourbon or sherry, or a wine cask, and then maybe finished in one of those other casks, making it 2 in total. But with quite a few of our releases, Angela, who I mentioned earlier, who created all of these, we have quite a lot of different types of casks that we draw from, and she spends a lot of time and had spent a lot of time in her lab vatting and sort of mixing different cask samples together to see, you know, what she could create. So with this one, there's 4 different types of casks. Excuse me, 4 different types of casks that have gone into it. 200-litre ex-bourbon, make up about 90% of the recipe, and then the remaining 10% is made up of Oloroso casks, so ex-Oloroso casks, American oak casks, and some Swedish oak casks, which I'll expand upon Swedish oak when we get to the next whiskey. But that's 4 different types of casks that have gone into it to try and get a particular flavour she's going for at the end. So anyone that's got a glass in front of them now, so if you haven't already, I'm sure you probably have, but have a little nose of it. I was talking about giving tips earlier. No needs. This 41.4%, so it's not, you know, particularly high for a whiskey, but even at 41%, you don't need to stick your nose all the way in your glass. Not like wine. It's you know, the spirit, the alcohol is so strong in there compared to things like wine. The alcohol and the flavours attached to it are trying to escape basically all the time. So give it maybe a little swirl. You don't need to swirl a whiskey, but if you want to, do it. And then come from the side a little bit maybe, and move it left and right as you breathe in with one's mouth open. It allows the air to flow through a little bit more, and move it underneath each nostril as we go. Yeah, so with this, if anyone hasn't popped anything in the chat just yet for tasting notes, will say for me, and any of our regulars would have heard me say this countless times before. Yeah, foam banana penny sweets for me all day. Joel, thank you very much for coming to join. I think if you've got any of the whiskies, appreciate you said you've not tried yet, so maybe you haven't poured anything this evening. But if you do have a kit at home and you're looking to try it another time, or just, you know, listen in for a little bit, please, you know, well, you're welcome. But I hope you do have some in front of you, and if you do, please let us know how you're finding it as you go through. But yeah, so on the nose, foam banana penny sweets for me, I can never really get back behind that much, but some vanilla, a little bit more butterscotch, but like a very light butterscotch for me, not too sickly sweet. I'll move to the palate as well, so thank you. Oh, cheers, even skull. So yeah, for me on there, it's darker again. You know, the way that the Mac was had quite a not a light fruity nose, but, you know, sort of like a medium light fruity nose. The Brooks whiskey for me has got a very light, sort of quite delicate nose to it, but then again comes in with more body and more texture than you expect. Obviously, it's not a shock to me. This is something I've had a number of times, but whenever I, you know, have a little sip of it and I'm doing a tasting, I try and think, you know, about that the first time I was having it, especially as well. Yeah, at the end, I think that finish, even for a 41.4 for a 41.4% whiskey, I think that's got quite a sizable and long finish to it. We call this our breakfast whiskey. Obviously not something that you should replace with your breakfast or have for your breakfast, but if you had a reason that day, or you're off to the races or whatever it might be, then a little dram of this, you could take a dram of this around breakfast time, and it's not going to ruin your entire day, or you won't need a nap, you know, come midday or whatever it might be. So we call this our breakfast whiskey, but obviously we do try and encourage responsible drinking and responsible time of or choice of the time that you do it as well. Yeah, I'm going to go for another sip. So yeah, score again. So something else in terms of tips I was told some time ago was, maybe when you're trying a whiskey for the first time, have a little sip of it. Don't let it sit in your mouth maybe too long. Take it down. Let you slowly let your tongue and your senses get used to the fact that you're putting 40% alcohol liquids over it. Then ease in, and then each next sip, have a little bit more, and then hold it a little bit longer. And as you are holding it, try and roll it around your tongue. Try and get it over as much as you can. You know, swish it around your mouth. You know, all within the realms of good taste. And if you can hold it in sort of long enough, you want to try and swallow and take it down sort of just before you think it's going to be in there too long. You know, and that's all going to be different for each of us, I appreciate, and you know, how far into the evening you might be. But yeah, just before then, and try and breathe in a bit, breathe in through your nose and things as you are as well, just to get oxygen moving around, you know, your head and your orifices, I guess. What a word to use. I think that's the first time I've ever used that on a whiskey tasting. Yeah, and once you've swallowed, then have a big breath in, breathe in through your mouth as well, to try and get oxygen flowing back over that tongue, and try and stimulate the senses that you have as much as possible. So yeah, if anyone wants to pop in any thoughts or thoughts, comments, as I said at the beginning, birthday shout outs, please feel free to do it. Otherwise, we'll move on, I think, to Svensk Ek, to number 3. I'll just finish this off. Cheers. It's foam banana penny sweets, even on the palate for me, that one. Right. So now we are on Svensk Ek. Svensk Ek. You see that, which if anyone wants to have a guess, I think the first word's probably easier to guess than the second, maybe. Svensk Ek, Swedish Oak. So, excuse me. So when we started in 1999, and for the first few years, I mentioned that, well, even to this day, Swedishness and being Swedish and being as authentically Swedish as we possibly can was a very big deal, and is a very big deal for the founders and people running the business now. And at the very beginning, they wanted to use, they set out in their minds that they wanted only to use Swedish oak casks. So they set about making casks out of Swedish oak. Nobody had been doing it, ever before. So they had to get and train a cooper, a woods worker that they sort of knew, or somebody knew, and train them on how to start making casks. But they found out very quickly, very early, that Swedish oak was just far too powerful a wood to use for long and even medium to long length maturation. And when I say powerful, what I mean by that is the wood itself had so many properties within it. So once you put your spirit and what would be whiskey into a cask, over the course of its life, it's moving in and out of the pores in that wood, and it's taking whatever flavor might be in that wood or color might be in that wood and putting it into the liquid very slowly over time. But Swedish oak compared to American oak was so powerful and so filled with tannins, and so few wood sugars, Lingins wood sugars available. They knew that they couldn't put things in there for too long. There was no, if you use the cask a few times maybe, and you draw a lot of that flavor and things out, then it would be maybe good for longer maturation. But in the earlier days, they didn't really have time for that. They needed to choose casks that would mature whiskey the right way early on, and then after that they could look at doing some other things, and spending a bit more time on them. So with this release, so having all that being said, it's called Swedish Oak, but only about 10%, well, in fact, 10% of this liquid has been in Swedish Oak casks. So everything in this whiskey that you've got begins its life in 200-litre ex-bourbon barrels. And we get those ex-bourbon barrels from a mixture of Four Roses, Heaven Hill, and Jack Daniels. And then for the last 18 months of that whiskey's life, we take a portion of that whiskey out. We take 10% of whatever's going to go into that batch and put it for 18 months in Swedish oak casks to try and get the right amount, to have the right balance at the end of things, to get the right flavors and characteristics that we want to extract from Swedish oak. So anyone that's had a nose off that already, I think for me, one of the first things I always note is it feels on the nose a bit more robust than the previous two, and some dark sort of brown sugar sweetness, but some woodiness, some oakiness behind it as well, some pepper and spice. And if you haven't moved to the palate yet, when you do, you're going to find this to be quite a peppery dram at first, at least, and then it moves through and sort of smooths out, and you get sort of like dark, lingering, gentle, spicy sweetness towards the end. So on that note, I'll say skål again. Skål. long pause there. So as I was chewing on that and enjoying it, this is probably the whiskey out of what we've got this evening that I reach for the most when I'm at home. This is, we've all got our own favourites, and I'll ask people what they are at the end, and please tell me whatever your favourite is as valid as anybody else's favourite that you'll ever meet in whiskey. That's a completely subjective thing. But this is the one that I go for the most. This is robust. I think it was a word I might have used a moment ago. I'll use it again because the palate for this is far more robust than both of the previous two that we've had, and I like a big meaty chewy dram. The last two definitely not lacking in texture. Texture is for me a very important part of my whiskey drinking experience, or things that I look out for. I don't like anything sort of too watery when it touches the tongue. This warms the mouth, and yeah, it warms me every time I have it. So yeah, so the Swedish Oak influence to it. I often describe it as having, I mentioned that our spirit character I would usually describe as sort of orchard fruits, warming spices, and maybe like a herbaceous herbal undertone, sort of marrying everything together. But this, we'll go back to another. Yeah, this I always describe it as having like the Swedish Oak influence, having like a cooking effect on those orchard fruits. So apple, for example, with this, it should have been fresh apple maybe on the previous two, or red apple, perhaps not green, but red apple. This is like baked apple pie to me, because there's a little bit of cinnamon sweetness, maybe like that sort of that spicy cinnamon sweetness. And yeah, apple pie, baked pears, maybe sort of a bit cooked banana and things as well, moving from foam banana penny sweets on Brooks whiskey to, to a cooked banana, to baked banana. Whilst if anyone, again, I'll say again, if anyone wants to pop any comments, thoughts in there, I think I've seen Steve actually has got one up. He said slight bitter edge, yeah, more complex than the first couple of drams. I would agree with that. I think maybe that's it. Maybe it's a bit more complexity perhaps that sort of draws me to it, but definitely a slight bitter edge to it, and that's from the Swedish Oak casks, I would say, or at least in large part. So Swedish Oak. I think Steve's definitely heard this tale before, but for anyone here that's not heard, of sort of Swedish Oak being used for anything before, I'll give you a little bit of a back story to it. So oak has grown in Sweden for as long as there's been oak in Europe, but only in the southern parts. So when you think of Sweden and the forests, you think of big pine forests and things. You don't really think much of oak, but oak has existed in the southern parts of Sweden for a considerable amount of time. However, it's not as quite abundant there as it might be in places like France, for example. And in 1830, give or take a year or so, a new Swedish king took the throne and decreed, as any good statesperson would, that they need to look a few generations down the line and plant as many oak trees as they could, so that they would have a good supply of wood for building ships in the future, for commerce, for war, for empire, expanding and maintaining. In those days, a lot of colonialism obviously going on. So he sent some emissaries out to go and scout good parts of Sweden to plant oak trees, look at where some oak trees are already growing and which ones are the best, examples of what they are. And they found a small oak wood on the island of Visingsö, which is about an hour and a half southwest of Stockholm, in a big lake, second biggest lake in Sweden, called Lake Vättern. And on that island, which was a famous island in Swedish folklore and like kings being buried there over the centuries as well, were two of the best oak trees that any of these emissaries found anywhere. So they felled one of them, took it back to the castle, and then compared it with others, and they decided that this island was where they were going to spend the next 10 years, planting up to, I think, 250 or 300,000 oak trees over a decade or so. So they started doing it. And they did some very clever things where they wanted to encourage the trees to grow as straight and tall as possible before they started sprouting branches. So if we look on the right-hand side, those are oak trees, which, if you have a look at the picture on the left, you can see the bark. Bark looks very familiar to anyone in the UK or most parts of Europe. We would recognise that as an oak tree. But if you look on the right, it doesn't look like oak as any of us know it, I think, or most of us would know it. So they cleverly did that by planting other trees in between these oak trees, so that the oak trees, as they grew, were encouraged to grow very tall and very straight to try and get to the light before they started sprouting branches. If we know anything about Japanese oak or Scottish oak, quite difficult to make casks out of it, or quite difficult to find a tree, an oak tree, that's worth that you could make a cask out of. You know, quite spindly, and they've got branches coming out everywhere, and the trunk's moving around. So it's a very clever piece of agricultural engineering allowed them to do that. However, anyone knows anything about naval history, nautical history, will know that all of these efforts that these guys are going to for these years, as clever and well thought out as things were, would not really come to fruition, or not have the effect or the end result that they're after. And that's because after about 5 years, also after about 30 years of this program beginning, iron ships began to sail the seas. The French had the first, and then shortly after that you saw that they had an ironclad ship, and then in the American Civil War you had the Monitor and the Richmond, I think it might have been called, but proper steel ships. So, you know, 30 years, 32, 33 years into a tree's 100 to maybe 170 year life before it's ready to be harvested and used for, you know, making casks or furniture or whatever it be, or ships. So 35 years in, call it, the technology began to become obsolete. So now you ended up with this huge oak forest that's been maintained and looked after, managed by the same 5 generations of one family on the island for years. And then in, you know, the late 1970s, they sent a telegram or a note or a letter to the Swedish Royal Navy High Command and said, "Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. We've got all your trees ready for your ships." To which the Swedish Naval Command probably replied back something in the way of, "Well, you can keep that very much, but, you know, thank you, thanks, but no thanks." So yeah, all of that. That's where we are today. Is we've got this huge forest of trees that are perfect for making casks. And because we use such a small amount of Swedish oak, we don't need to fell that many trees at all to do it. So they're very, very carefully selected. There's lots of longevity and sustainability in mind, and the forest, as mentioned, has been looked after for the same by the same, you know, family, for 5 generations. So it's a very well looked after, very properly managed wood. And every now and then, every so often, we go in, take a small number of trees and turn them into casks. So that's a bit of a background to it. So if anyone's had a bit more to drink, had a bit more to nose, and has got any other notes on it, please feel free to pop them in the chat. Otherwise, in a moment or so, we'll move on to the next track. I'll just slowly see this off, excuse me. I enjoy that one. That's very good, for me at least. So next whiskey that we've got, Stjärnrök. Is that any good? Can you see that? Stjärnrök. So Stjärn at the beginning means star, and the last 3 letters, rök, means smoke. So this is called Star Smoke, and this is the first one that we've got this evening. The first and the only that's from our seasonal range that I mentioned. So our core range, same as any whiskey company, is about having a little selection of whiskies on offer that will be the same year after year, that people can sort of, if they know they liked it one year, can come back in a couple of years and they can get the same thing. It'll be taste the same to them, and offer a good little range or selection of examples of the sort of flavour and characteristics that we want to be known for, that we're trying to get out of our whiskey. And then we've got the seasonal range, which, as mentioned, come out twice a year. So there'll be a limited edition out in spring summer, and then one out in autumn winter. This is last year's autumn winter. And I'll mention something in a moment, but this is currently the most recent one that we've got on sale until the next week, 2 weeks, and then this year's spring summer's coming out. And the seasonals for us are about trying to showcase the MACKMYRA spirit character in slightly different ways that are attuned to whichever season they're coming out with, hence the seasonal title that we give them. So this year, this one that we've got here was for autumn winter last year. So something that you want to have by a fireside, something that might be out looking at the stars, star smoke, and sitting by a bonfire, with a whiskey that can warm you from the inside while the fire warms you from the out. And this one, so this is also our first peated whiskey of the evening. So a little bit, well, actually a considerable amount of our peated spirit has gone into this, but because we use quite a lot of different casks, as I mentioned earlier, it's a relatively complex cask recipe. This one is no different to that. It's not just smoke. Smoke's not the main show. If anyone here this evening's not really liked peated whiskey before, please let us know what you think about this. Whether if you don't like it, let us know. If you think it's just like every other smoky whiskey you've had, but please say. But if not, what we hear relatively often, at least, is people say, "Oh, I didn't like peated whiskey before, but this is all right." Or they say, "But I didn't like it before, but this is good." Or "Oh, I'm going to have another glass of that. Thanks very much." Because our peat is very different to what I think most people think of when they think of a peated whiskey. When you think of the type of peated whiskies that come from southeastern Islay, the Cadorton 3, that you quite often see on back bars, and incredibly popular stuff. Whiskies that I've got a number of different bottles of back there. But this is a very different type of peat to it, much more resinous, sort of tarry, salty peat rather than a medicinal TCP iodine type of peat. So that's what we've got. And then this year, so the one that's about to come out now is called Limousine, which I've got a bottle of somewhere, but I think Carl might have a picture that you can show us. Limousine, what we can see here is a French landscape from the Cognac region. So Limousine is a type of French oak, and the main influential casks that we've used in this one's recipe are French oak cognac casks, so ex-cognac that's all been in French oak, and Limousine. So, and then the box is sort of celebrating the golden hour. If anyone's heard of the famous hour that photographers and filmmakers love to get up, basically around the crack of dawn, waiting for that golden hour, the light just looks beautiful, and that's what that last image was sort of reflective of as well. So this one, if I think some bloggers and some shopkeepers and things have had a sample of this now, but it's going to go on sale. We're just waiting for some bottles to clear at our warehouse and in the UK, and then we're all good to go and good for a launch. And I think if you tune in on the 24th of March, we're going to be doing a launch day on the 24th of March. So have a look at our socials for that, and you can see a little bit more about it. And I don't know if there's a way of getting samples in before, but they'll definitely be doing some sort of deal on the night for the new one. And it's quite, if you like Svensk that we just had, it's not the same, but it's akin to it in that it's got a bit of pepperiness, a bit of spiciness to it, but it's more like a velvet pepper and a velvet spice, because the fruits from the ex-cognac casks really come through, especially so it's a bit pepper on the tongue, a bit of velvet pepper and spice at first, and then that transitions into a sort of vinous green and red or white, or whatever the color, white and red black grapes, and sort of very fruity as we move into the finish, and got some really good sort of velvety sweetness and things. So definitely one to look out for, and one that we're quite excited to be able to talk about. So that's Limousine, and then back to this one is Stjärnrök. So I'll say it again. Cheers. Have a little taste of this myself. So I mentioned smoke on the nose and on the palate. Maybe it grows a bit on the finish, but no matter what stage it is, it's not the main show. It's not the front man. So some peated whiskies you can have, and it's basically might be all peat with a little bit of complexity in the background. I would say that for me, whenever I have this, I always think that the peat's just woven into it rather than being the front man of a band. It's part of an ensemble. It's part of an orchestra. It's everyone's contributing in a as it more or less equal parts to everyone else. This has got quite a lot of vanilla sort of caramel sweetness on the nose as well. So quite a lot of the casks used in this, well, the main influential casks would be our smoky whiskey Oloroso cask. So smoky Oloroso would say overall. There's quite a lot of American oak cask and ex-bourbon has gone into this too, and a small amount of a Lingonberry wine cask, I think it is. So Lingonberry wine is a very traditional Swedish wine, and we use that those casks from time to time in things, either as the main thing or as we have here, where we use a smaller amount of them to try and get a bit of balance and some different flavors in. And I always describe that as like funky fruits. sort of like, like overripe, sort of odd fruits that, on their own in a bowl wouldn't look too appealing, but when it's mixed in with other things and other flavors in a glass of whiskey, as this is here, adds a nice bit of complexity to it and another dynamic. Yeah. Oh. Right, another sip for me there. Yeah, and again, good texture on that. I think the texture is more, I don't think it's as robust as Svensk Ek, the one that we had just before. It's a different type of texture, because again, it's mouth coating, and I can feel it. I can feel that texture on the tongue, and then afterwards, like now, I can still feel it around the inside of my cheeks, which for me is, I love, and I said earlier, texture for me in a whiskey is one of the most important things. After the nose, I think it's probably the first thing I notice. When I put a whiskey on the palate, if it's a watery whiskey, it doesn't matter how sort of flavorful the liquid might be and the taste, I'm already a little bit put off by the wateriness of something. They might bring it back, and the taste could be so delicious that I think, oh, that was a little bit watery at first, but that was good. More often than not, that's not the case with me. But all of these that we've had, and in fact everything we've got on offer here this evening, I think it's got, for me, just that right amount of texture and slightly different types of it, but yeah, on the money for it. So this one, I mentioned earlier about a deal that we do. So we always do a little offer when we do our virtual tastings. This one, if you like and enjoy the whiskey that we've got here, and you want to buy a bottle of Stjärnrök, if you go on to mackmyra.co.uk and find a bottle of it, put it in a basket, and you'll be able to get and then a bottle of the Core Range. So any of the other 4 that we've had this evening, put that in the basket too. Enter the code that is going across here. Can I do that? That's harder than it looks. Oh, there we go. Oh, nice. Well done, mate. Stjärnrök 40. And perhaps if I could ask Carl, my beautiful assistant in the background, handsome Carl, to pop that code in the chat. So if anyone wants to copy and paste the code, it'll be available in the chat for you to do so. I think that's something we're capable of. And if anyone hasn't got any more notes or comments or questions or anything, let's move on to Svensk Rock, the last one of the evening. Svensk Rock. So everyone should be able to guess what the first word means, as I've told you already with Svensk Ek. And in fact, actually, I've told you what Rock means as well, so no excuses for anyone that doesn't know. Svensk Rock means Swedish Smoke. So 2 of our flagships, you probably worked out from the Core Range, Swedish Oak and Swedish Smoke. And that one, Svensk Ek, because we wanted to, we put Swedish in there as well, because it's us trying to be as sort of Swedish and authentically, quintessentially Swedish as we can, by having some Swedish Oak character in there, and the least one of the least complex cask recipes that we have. So, all in ex-bourbon to start its life, where ex-bourbon is probably one of the least, depending on how fresh it might be and where it's come from, appreciate, but probably one of the least influential in terms of inputting flavor characteristics into a whiskey, one of the least influential casks that there is. So you end up with a far cleaner example of what a spirit character, what a whiskey's character would be like. So that's like a pure form of our spirit character there, and then 10% of it going into Swedish Oak to try and get something as Swedish as we can, and then going on to Stjärnrok that we have now, Stjärnrok. Swedish Smoke is us. It's us endeavouring to do the same thing as we did with Svensk Ek, but showcasing the difference in our smoke, I guess, in our smoky spirit compared to other smoky whiskies that are out there, peated whiskies that are out there. I mentioned at the beginning, all of our ingredients come from Sweden, but they had a hurdle to jump over, to climb over at the very beginning when they're starting out. They knew from the beginning, from the outset, that they wanted to distill both a peated and an unpeated whiskey. The people in Sweden loved both, so why wouldn't you do both? Why wouldn't you have both on offer, was their thinking. The only problem was with making a peated whiskey and wanting all of the ingredients to be Swedish was there was nobody in Sweden at the time, and I think other than us, maybe to this day, I'll put an asterisk next to that, was peating any barley, because there's no demand for it, there's no call for it, there's no market for it. So instead of either ordering peat in from overseas or peated barley in from overseas, which is a very common thing to do, and I think a perfectly acceptable thing to do if you distill and mature your whiskey in the country you say to be from. In my humble opinion, I think that it's very well, it's from that place. I don't think you have to go to the lengths of making sure all your ingredients are from said country, but the founders saw it as their responsibility to make sure that everything was as Swedish as it could possibly be, so that we could have our own footprint and our own identity. And, you know, sort of other people that come after us and that have done it, some great Swedish whiskies out there from other distilleries, they don't need to follow the footsteps that we've laid down, but being the first, they saw it as their responsibility to make it as quintessentially Swedish as possible. So because no one was peating any barley, we've gone through, they went through the process of learning how to malt and peat barley themselves. Which is what we've been doing, and here we go. So the very first peated run that we did, we sent the barley off to Viking maltings near Gothenburg on the west coast. But they malted the barley, and then they had to go into the maltings up and down a big elevator with a number of wheelbarrows to get the green malt, the malted barley out, transport it back to where the founders were living, and then peat it themselves in the building, or the contraption you can see on your left is our smoker. So the pagoda roof up the top, and you can see just under where the roof comes down, that's where the barley goes in, and then underneath is where the peat and the burning material goes. So they did it in that, and then they realized that it wasn't very economically friendly, nor environmentally friendly to keep going back and forth and getting somebody else to malt it. So they thought, right, when we're making our peated barley, we will use that. You can see on the right hand side in that picture was a big sort of bin, basically a malting bin that we use. Yeah, the long one on the right. So barley would go in there, get it warm, get it moist, as you need to do to malt your barley, and start doing it. So, and then that's a tradition that we've carried on with today. We no longer use these because we do things on a much larger scale. We do about 80 tons of malted barley a year, but we are one of fewer than, I think 10, but I hedge my bets with this and say 12. But we're one of fewer than 12 distilleries, whiskey distilleries in the world that malt and peat their own barley on site. So every gram of peated barley that we use, we have malted and peated ourselves, which I think is when you're looking at things like provenance and wanting to, you know, feel informed about the sort of whiskey that you're drinking or that you've got in the glass. For me, you can see that I buy as much whiskey as I talk about and sell bottles of, and I always like to feel like I know a little bit more about the whiskey that I'm drinking, or just, you know, some sort of provenance information. It's not vital, but it's nice. I think it's something I enjoy very much, and very happy that we get to talk about the fact that we malt and peat barley there. When I was over there last year, had full tours, got to do a little bit of help here and there, and yeah, very fun, very fun experience indeed. So right, on the nose for that, I think definitely more smoke is more of the main show. We get, you know, maybe not the front man again, but definitely more of a bigger part of this than Stjärnrök was. And that's because we're trying to showcase what we can do with peat. And you might find, well, in fact, you know, say you could well find some notes in there that you're not familiar with smokes and smoky whiskey. I mentioned that, you know, our peat is quite a different type of peat to Isla peat, or even Highland peat that gets used quite often as well in Scotland, even from some Isla distilleries. Our peat is a lot more sort of salty and minerally, I think, in terms of a smoke. But then in addition, or contributing again to it being a different type of smoke altogether, is we do something quite different with our peating process, or quite different. We add another ingredient in. So 99% of the burning mass that we have is Swedish peat, and then the remaining percentage will be dried juniper branches, dried juniper twigs, we can see here. So yeah, so no berries on there, you can see. So gin has got nothing to do with this. Dried juniper branches. One of the reasons for it, in fact, the reason for it was, again, trying to differentiate ourselves from Scotland from the very beginning and trying to make a Swedish single malt whiskey. So it's still single malt, still up there with the, you know, the single malts that we all know in terms of how everything is made, but they wanted it to be Swedish, as Swedish as they could. So they followed 2,000 years, 3,000 years of Scandinavian history of adding juniper branches to a burning mass. When what they used to do was add juniper branches to a burning mass to get different flavors infused into meat or fish that they were curing for the winter seasons. So yeah, we followed that suit, basically tried a few different ingredients at the start, the traditional type of things that you would have on a fire, and they decided that juniper branches was the way to go. And a friend of mine, when he had a nose of this for the first time, said it was like a campfire in the rain. So it's quite a poetic or romantic sort of tasting note, I think. I always give him credit for it. I didn't invent it myself, but yeah, so like a wet smoke, like a damp smoke to it, I always find, yeah. Yeah, and Steve, yeah, balance of flavour is good. Peat is there, but isn't slapping you in the chops. Yeah, you know, exactly, and that's what we're trying to get, balance. And sorry, Steve, and using the word balance there is key for us. That's what, throughout every whiskey we've ever released, I would say, yeah, I don't think there's been any that's sort of gone against the grain in this sense. But balance is something that we try and achieve with every release that we've had. Single casks can be different, of course. But every release that you would have been able to buy from us from a shop that isn't a single cask, balance is what we're looking for along the way. So I'll move on to the palate. Score, yeah. So again, I'm going to say that T word again, texture. That I'm chewing that all day. That one, the texture on that, different type of texture again. So any of the ones that we've had this evening. Peat, incidentally, does add texture to a whiskey. Where you might see some distilleries use very small amounts of peat or ppm, very low numbers. They're trying to achieve texture as much as they are trying to get a little bit of smoke and balance or something to it. But this, yeah, very well textured. I can taste it even now, you know, after 20-30 seconds of having that sip. All coating around the inside of my mouth and all over my tongue there. And a bit more, quite a chocolatey, I think, like a smoky, chocolatey flavour and note on the palate for me. And then, you know, like a herbaceous, like a herbal, something green to it that links palate all the way through to finish, I think. I'll have a go in there and I'll say cheers. I hope everyone's enjoyed themselves this evening. As I move in and have a little sip of this myself, please feel free to pop in the chat what your favourites might have been. You know, did you like Mac at the beginning? You like Brooks Whiskey, Svensk Ek, Stjärnrök? Feel free to either pop in the order in which you like things, what your favourites might be. I appreciate for some of the regulars that we've got here this evening. Yeah, it could be, you know, well, in fact, I'd say, you know, pop it in if you want to take the time. I always like to see what people say because it may well change from week to week. You know, you ask me what my favourite whiskey is today, it'll be a different answer what I give you, you know, tomorrow or even 3 hours from then, depending on what I've been eating or drinking or the company I've been keeping that evening. It's very an evolving thing. So yeah, so please feel free to let us know what your favourites might be, and move in and have a little sip. Cheers. Yeah, so that's a long one there because this is, you know, I said Svensk Ek is one that I probably reach for the most, but I wonder actually, is Stjärnrök out of these the one? Maybe it depends who I've got around for the evening. I'll say, have a little try of this, have a little try of that. Stjärnrök, this one that we're on now, is one of the two whiskies. When I first discovered MACKMYRA a few years before starting working here, that turned me on to the brands, that made me think, oh, this is all right. And you know, I had no idea Swedish whiskey existed, but this is decent. Yeah. So Steve, this evening, Svensk Ek is his favourite. Yeah, it's up there for me. I mean, you can say there's every answer is right, of course, but yeah, I would agree with that. I think yeah, Svensk Ek is definitely up there for me. But then is Stjärnrök, I don't know. I'll talk myself around in circles, perhaps. Right. Well, if anyone, there's no more questions or or got comments, feedback, or anything flooding in, I might say that's not a bad time to wrap things up. Let people go get their dinner. And we'll go that. I'll say thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you, Steve and Bully, if you're here still, and anyone that's joined. I hope to see you again. If you have a look at our socials, you'll see. I think it is the 24th. Carl will probably comment somewhere. Let me know if I'm incorrect, but I think it's the 24th of March. Have a look at what we're doing, because we're going to do a proper launch of Limousine, the next seasonal release, this year's spring summer, and it is delicious. It is. I mean, again, it's all subjective and things. Don't want to project on people too much, but I can't wait to start going out and talking to people about it and having it on tastings, because all the feedback I've had so far from some of the shops that I've been to see to give them sneak previews and things has been positive across the board so far. So very much looking forward to that. John, I really hope that you get to try some soon. Maybe reach out to us and see, maybe we can get you a sample in the post if you don't have anything there. Send us a message on Facebook and say that you want a virtual tasting, and someone said maybe we could do something, just because you said you'd never tried it before, and if you don't have any there, maybe we can see about sending you something just for being with us this evening. I think that's something we should probably look at. Cool. Right. Well, I'll say I hope everyone has a good evening, a good rest of their week. Hope to see everyone on the 24th. And cheers and skål. Cheers.